Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about something that is uniquely American, and that is the American dream. That is not to say that the American or the concept of a country and its dream does not exist in other places, but in America, it has elevated to a pop culture icon. It has elevated to something that you see in movies and TV series all the time. It's often found in our songs, our poems, our short stories, and our novels as well. What many people consider to be one of the great American novels, Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, is truly an American story. In his case, it's a journey down the Mississippi and the realization that we cannot treat people differently just because of their skin color. This is very uniquely an American dream. During the big period of immigration to our country in the 1800s and early 1900s, many immigrants came to our country thinking that America was the place to get rich quick type of thing. That's the American dream. We Americans have perpetuated this dream. We believe in it. Sometimes we think it's falling by the wayside, but in many cases, many of us are living the American dream. So you're going to listen to and watch this presentation on the American dream from the country to the city, which actually follows the progression of the American dream over the 200 plus year history of America. As America grows, the dream changes. And so we're going to see how the dream has changed over time as well. It's important that you pay attention to this presentation because you're going to use this information to analyze poems, songs, and short stories in class. And as part of that analysis, you have to determine which elements of the American dream are found here. Now, before we get started, you should also know that there's a flip side to the American dream, and that is the American nightmare. Really, you have this juxtaposition of two concepts. You have a positive concept and you have a negative concept, and they're in opposition of each other. And to really find a balance of the American dream, you have to find yourself somewhere from the middle towards the positive. You know, that's the balance. You know, not everybody's going to get to the total positive end of the American dream, but you do want to try to stay away from the total nightmare end of the dream. It's interesting because many pieces of literature, including the two pieces that you have to read for your oral exam, The Color Purple and The Great Gatsby, truly deal with this concept of the American nightmare as opposed to the American dream. Finding those balances between Seeley from The Color Purple and Jay Gatsby from The Great Gatsby, finding the balance. And what happens when they don't find the balance? What happens when the scales are tipping towards the negative? That's a very predominant theme, especially in modern American literature of the 21st century. And we're going to see why a little later on in the presentation, because you should know that this concept of the American dream, that phrase, did not really exist until the early 1900s. So all these things we're talking about in the beginning, this is what people believe, but they weren't necessarily calling it an American dream at that time. Okay, so we're going to get started. So we're going to talk about first the country's beginnings from 1776 to about the 1830s. This is the time of the start of the American Revolution up to the foundation and the formation of a new country. And that's really important because at this point we're finding ourselves. Who are we as Americans? Many documents in our history sort of portray this concept of the American dream. And actually, in 1776, Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence. And they said this statement. And this statement was, you could probably attribute it to being one of the very first statements that articulates what is it about Americans that make us different from other people? Or what is it we believe that we think makes us different? Because we're not necessarily different. And this was the idea that, everybody, every man, which they really didn't mean at that time, but we've come to accept it as every man and every woman, they're equal. Not only are they equal, they have specific rights. And nobody, including the federal government, has the right to take that away. And those rights are the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. That every American, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, has the right to a fulfilling life, has the right to freedom or liberty, and has the right to pursue happiness. And this is very important. It doesn't give them the right to happiness, it gives them the right to pursue, go after happiness. Nobody should be able to hold you back from happiness. What's interesting is if you read dystopian novels often deal with teens who are being held back from this pursuit of happiness. Yeah, take the Hunger Games series. The main character is being held back from a concept of happiness because she's being forced to do things that don't necessarily make her happy. They might make her happy if she wasn't being forced, but because she's being forced to do them, that pursuit of happiness is being taken away from her by the capital city. And that's what a lot of dystopian novels deal with, especially with teens, because teens believe that so many people are conspiring against them to take away this pursuit of happiness. And it doesn't matter who you are, from the youngest baby to the oldest person living in America, you have the right to pursue happiness. And that's key to what we believe. So, in this period of time, there are probably three elements of the dream that are very, very predominant in American society. The first, obviously, is this concept of rebellion. As you can see from that movie poster, which came out in the 1950s with James Dean, Live Fast, Die Young. That was true in the 1950s, but was also true in 1776. Remember, this is a country that was founded on rebellion. We rebelled against the British. We kicked them out. So therefore, we have this underdog mentality because nobody expected us to win, least of all the British. They really, truly underestimated fighting a war on a soil that was not technically theirs. So therefore, we're founded on this rebellion. We have this underdog mentality. And then this shows up very much in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which is referred to as the Bill of Rights. And we're going to look at that a little later. Actually, that's what you need to do for the next lesson, is talk about the Constitution. But these first 10 amendments guarantee our right to rebel. I mean, this is where you have the right to carry a gun. Okay? You have the right not to be arrested without probable cause. These are the things, we kept these things very, very dear to our heart. And these first 10 amendments, this Bill of Rights, is so important in American society because it allows us to, when we need to, form a rebellion if we have to. Okay? So the very first part of the dream that came out was this concept of rebellion. Now, on the opposite side is the concept of conformity. When we fought the American Revolution, basically there were three different types of people that were involved in the American Revolution. The North, which would have gone from like New York all the way up to Maine, Massachusetts. The Middle States, which would have included the very more different religious states, like the Quakers in Pennsylvania, the Catholics in Maryland, the Swedish Protestants that were in Delaware, and also then the southern plantation owners from North Carolina, South Carolina, and things like that. So three different groups already, so that they were not the same type of people. So there's a lot of infighting, let's say specifically between the North, the Massachusetts area, and the Carolinas specifically. But yet, these three different groups came together, kept their individuality, and were able to band together to defeat the British. So we really believe that even though you live in America, you're still an individual. And you really should not be a conformist. You should not just conform what you believe to society's ways. And this is why in America you see lots and lots of different types of groups and things like that. And we allow it. We may not all agree with some of the beliefs of some of the groups and things like that, but we allow it. You have the right to be different. And that's very, very important, because that's what we fought for, the right to be different. And as we formed the Constitution later on in 1787, the Constitution reflected these differences, this concept of a federal government versus state rights. That was a huge difference between the North and the South. We're constantly doing this in America, this difference between the North and the South, the East and the West. It's constantly coming on. But no matter whether the East likes the West or the North likes the South or vice versa, we still believe in the right to be different. And that's important. And that became even more important as we grew into this melting pot or salad bowl of cultures. Immigration has brought more and more people of different ethnic background to our country. With that has brought more different traditions, which now in some cases have been adopted by Americans, in some cases have only been adopted by that ethnic group. But we sort of become this, at first we were called this like melting pot, like this blended soup sort of thing, where all the nationalities were together in one pot, and they blended together to form this thing called American. Many people now believe that we're more of a salad bowl, in the concept that, the Russians come in, the Mexicans come in, the Italians come in, the Irish, the Chinese, and they're each different. They each have a different flavor. And by keeping their individuality and their flavor, we have grown into a much more diverse country. We Americans believe that we're an extremely diverse country. That doesn't mean historically that we haven't had problems with diversity. We certainly have, and we still do today. But we believe very strongly that we are a diverse society. And it's not unusual to find people of different ethnic backgrounds looking forward to the street fair from Brazil, let's say, or the Hispanic Parade Day, because they get to explore these different cultures. We love the concept of exploring and finding out things about new cultures within the boundaries of our country. And we're not very big on traveling sometimes, and we're not the best travelers in the world, but we still believe within the boundaries of our country in this concept of diversity, and that's really, really, really very important to us. So again, we may rebel, but in that rebellion, we keep our individuality, and in keeping that individuality, we become a very diverse country, and that is the biggest part of the American dream right now, is the fact that we're so diverse, but yet we tend to be very open and understanding and accepting of new traditions that come into our country. During this early time, we were technically in uncharted land, and at the beginning they didn't really figure out how big we were. But we were big enough that all the people who came over could own a piece of land. How they got that, that's a whole different story we'll talk about when it comes to the Native Americans. But yet, it was this concept that, if you came over specifically from Europe, so a lot of people who came over from Europe didn't have the opportunity to buy land in Europe. Land was owned by the nobility and the royals and things like that. And you couldn't break that tradition. Here, we didn't have the royals. We didn't have the nobility. We didn't have part of the feudal system with manors and things like that. So the land was there for taking. And so what happens is people began to take land. Either they took it or they bought it, whatever the case may be. And very early in our society, the amount of land that one owned was equal to the wealth or power or rights. The Constitution first only gave voting rights to men who owned land. That's how important land ownership was. So you could not vote unless you owned land. If you were a woman, you could possibly own land, but you could not vote. You certainly didn't own land if you were Native American or black or Hispanic or anything like that. So we've always equated land ownership to power, rights, and wealth. And if you own a piece of land, well, it's probably normal that you're going to put a house on that piece of land. So this concept that everybody had his own individual house, not necessarily terrace housing or anything like that, where it was one house next to the other, but a freestanding, detached house. And of course, the bigger your house, the bigger person you were in many people's mind. And that still happens today. You know, they talk about sometimes the hugeness of some of the homes in America, not just the mansions you see of the rich people, but of the middle class people as well. Especially the middle class believes that the bigger the house, the more people will perceive them as being wealthy or being not middle class. That's very, very important. Today, 70% of all Americans own a home. 70%. You know, and that's, in our country, that's a heck of a lot of people. You're talking a country that has a population of over 300 million people. And those that don't own a house, their dream is to own a house. People who live in an apartment, it's only supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to help you save money so that you can buy a house. And once you do buy a house, it's usually not in the city, but out where you can have a bit of land, a tract of land to go with it. That's very, very important. And as you can see in this graph, that it's important to all races, all nationalities. So, for example, you'll see that, you know, in the U.S. total, the dark blue line, you know, that has inched up even more as we go beyond 2009 to closer to 70%. But, you know, right now, mostly it's white people who own land. But you can see from the other lines, specifically look at the yellow, the goldish line, which represents the African American. You know, that was a big dream of the African Americans, was to own land. And then in 2004, that sort of peaked up. It's sort of on a decline a little bit, but it's coming back around. A part of that has to do with the recession and things like that. And of course, a recession always hits the poorest people hardest, the minority groups hardest. But you see too the Hispanics, the light blue line, even more Hispanics than African Americans own a home. Notice the Native Americans and Native Alaskans. They're almost at 60% nowadays. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Native Americans live on reservations. Reservations are not controlled by the federal government, and therefore don't have to follow all the rules. And then one of the rules they don't have to follow is the gambling rule. So more and more Indian reservations have gambling casinos. And the profits from those casinos go to the people who live on the reservation, which helps them to own houses. The Asian population has always been very keen to assimilate, and one of the ways they found that they could assimilate was to buy a home. So you see that they're probably, of all the ethnic groups, of all the minority groups, they're the highest in terms of percentage of ownership by race. Now, if you don't own a home, then, yeah, it's this concept of the negative side of this is the raping of the land. And unfortunately, yeah, we are very good at this sometimes, at least early in our history. The cutting down of complete forests without reforestation, drilling for oil. Now, of course, the big thing is fracking. Do we do fracking in Alaska and other places because it's harmful to the environment? But the other part of this is a very sad piece of our history, and that is the removal of the Indians from their native lands. And in 1829, Congress actually passed a law called the Indian Removal Act that moved Indians from where they were. Here you can see in this map, from the east, they moved them to the west. This was a very bad, very bad time in our history because we forced these people off the land. And you know, Native Americans don't believe in land ownership. They believe in a sameness with the land. You know, the land gives, but you have to give back to the land. One of the worst removals was the Trail of Tears, where we took Indians from the Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky areas and we moved them out west, eventually even into the Northwest. These Indians were on basically forced marches. The cavalry, the army had them march, and it's called the Trail of Tears because so many of them cried and died, and babies and women and men all lost the way, and basically many of these Indians and Native Americans lost their hope. And the worst thing that can happen to a Native American is to lose hope. And so for many years, until probably the 1960s, 1970s, when they really re-empowered themselves, Indians were very much a hopeless cause. They had lost hope. They felt that they had lost their land. The land had been taken from them. They watched Americans rape the land by littering and things like that. So this was a very bad period. And these were people who, like I said, didn't necessarily own the land, but yet they were in commune with the land, and they treated the land well. In the 1970s, we had this television ad campaign and the billboard campaign that sort of reminded us of what terrible things we did to people. And this is important. America has done some not so many great things in history. That's true. But America finds a way to atone for its sins. Sometimes it's very late. But we do believe that atonement is a good thing. And this was one of the things we did. We reminded, we wanted people not to litter. This was the basic premise. So what did they do? They brought in this Native American actor, and they had him look at the highways and the roads covered in litter. And then the very last scene of the ad on television was this single tear dropping from the American Indian's eye, reminding us that we're raping the land, and that reminding us that this is a very negative American dream concept. It was a very effective campaign, actually. And litter was reduced dramatically during this campaign, and it was the 70s, so I remember it distinctly because I was growing up at that time, and many of us now who grew up in that time with these types of ads, this is what moved us into that liberal mode of having a better understanding of Native Americans. The third big piece of the American dream that came out of this time frame was this concept of education. Very early in our country, we established schools and colleges and universities. Harvard was the first university established on American soil. Schools were set up in communities. As a community developed, one of the first things they did was build a school. Not a church, as often is the case here in Europe, or was the case here in Europe, but they built a school, and that became the focus or the center point of the village. Because we strongly believe that if you have education, if you have a sense of education, if you have a degree, if you have a high school diploma, then you can advance. So the first, and this is something that has changed dramatically over time. In the beginning, because we were an agricultural society, it was believed that we can create this informed citizenship by having students go to school until the age of, let's say, 14. At that point, they were needed more on the farm to help with the harvest and the planting and things like that. As we moved into an industrial society in the mid 1800s, it became more 16, 17 years of age, and hopefully a high school diploma. A high school diploma was not necessary for up until at least the 1970s to get a decent job. But some education, some high school was necessary. Now, you probably cannot get a job in America without at least a basic high school diploma. And having a college education, at least a bachelor's degree, which for us is a 4-year degree, that is what most people look for now. And that is changing too. Now, more and more people are moving into getting master's degree, which is 2 additional years beyond the 4-year degree. So education continually changes because the nature of society changes as we move from agricultural to industrial to a service economy. The educational needs of jobs have changed dramatically. Therefore, more and more people have advanced degrees now. But from the very beginning of our country, we believe that everybody, and this is very important, education is free in America to everybody, including illegal immigrants. We believe that the only way that you become a productive member of American society is to have an education. And here you can see that, again, over time, the number of people having a high school degree has changed dramatically. Now we're talking almost 90% of Americans have at least a high school degree. Yeah, you may say, yeah, but here in Belgium that number is even higher. And you're right, it probably is here in Belgium. But again, when you're dealing with a very diverse country, a very large country like our country, that number is very, very significant. And again, it's tied to the economy. You can see as we moved from an industrial society in the 1940s into a more service-orientated society in the 1970s, 1980s, more and more people got high school diplomas. And that has then affected bachelor's degrees, which is the 4-year degree. So now more and more people are either going from high school right to college to get a bachelor's degree, and if they did not prior, then they go back. It's not uncommon in America to be sitting in a class with an 18-year-old and a 35-year-old and possibly even a 50-year-old. All pursuing the same bachelor's degree. So it's not uncommon at all in America. So nowadays, about 90% of Americans have a high school degree. A little over 50%, almost 60%, have some college. An associate's degree is a 2-year degree. And usually you get this at what's called a community college. It's only 2 years. It doesn't carry the same weight as a bachelor's degree. For us, a bachelor's degree is a 4-year degree in most cases. So you're talking having a bachelor's and or an associate's, almost 70% of the population nowadays. You can see getting a master's degree, which is 2 more years, is usually not as required. Some professions, lawyers, doctors, and teachers in America all need a master's degree. But now more and more people are getting a master's degree in business. This is what's setting them apart from other business students. So that number is significantly on the rise. And then a doctorate, which is the PhD or an EDD degree. Less people do that. It's usually a very highly specialized population that does that. And this does not include doctors or lawyers. Doctors have an MD and lawyers have a judicious doctorate. That number does not include those because it is required to have those if you go into those 2 fields. But again, this is changing. So this represents today's society, but I would imagine in 10 years, the numbers for masters and doctorates will rise significantly. So what if you don't have a lack of, what if you don't have an education? There's a lack of education. That's the anti-dream. We truly believe if you don't have an education, you're stuck. You know, there's no upward mobility for you. You're stagnant, basically. Uh, Often you see in literature that people without an education lead a life of crime. That's not to say that some of the best criminals in America have been very, very smart people. But that doesn't mean they were very, very smart at school, or that they enjoyed school, or they got out of school. But we believe that there's this correlation between the fact that if you don't have a degree, then what are you going to do with your life? Well, nothing. So therefore, you are going to become a criminal of some sort. Okay? And this is so important that when you commit a felony in America and you're convicted of committing a felony in America, you cannot vote. Let me repeat that. If you are convicted of committing a felony crime in America, like murder, you cannot vote because we just don't believe that you are an upstanding citizen of our country, and therefore that you don't necessarily have the ability or the inclination to make the decisions at the voting booth. That's very important. So, yeah, if you have a lack of education, it leads to crime, then basically if you're convicted, it can take away your voice in America. And it's one's individual voice is so, so important in America. You have to have your own voice. All right, moving to the middle part of our history, which is encompasses the period of industrialization, the Civil War, up to World War I. Okay, at this time, one of the big things that happened was the fact that the gold rush occurred. Okay, so you see a picture here. Gold was discovered in California, and men and women and children rushed from the east to the west to seek their fortune. And we're going to see that this is a very important concept, one that we still believe in today. So you see in this quote here that, you know, talking about the change in the American dream. In the beginning, it was the dream of the Puritans, of Benjamin Franklin, where they needed to accumulate modest fortunes with landowning and house building and things like that. But this new dream talked about having instant wealth, that you don't need to do anything for it. You just need to move your butt out to the west, put a pan in some water, and hopefully when you bring it out, you have a few gold nuggets. And this was all part of the concept of the gold rush. And the first gold rush was at Sutter's Mill in the area now around San Francisco. It's very interesting. The gold rush was in 1849, and the football team for the city of San Francisco is called the 49ers, named after the gold rush. Just an interesting tidbit. All right. So one of the first things, this concept of go west, young man. The journalist Horatio Alger first coined this term, that the best way for men in the East to better themselves was to pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and move out west. As you move out west, that shows that you have endurance, that you have strength, that you have perseverance. Because it was not an easy trip. You had to go through Indian country at this time, and the Indians weren't very friendly. Imagine, based on what happened to them. You had to face various elements of weather that you've never had to face before. Tornadoes, which are very, very common in the middle section of our country, but not in the East Coast. So you had to face different things, different terrains, crossing mountains, crossing small deserts, things like that. So it was very, very important that if you were able to move from the east to the west, you had this sense of endurance and strength and perseverance. And then, of course, as the quote said earlier, yeah, your fortune can be made. Today, of course, it's Hollywood. Then it was gold. But now everybody believes, man, if I can get myself to Hollywood, I'll have it made, you know. During this time, as more and more people moved out west, we developed this concept of the pioneer spirit. The people who moved from the east to the west were called pioneers. They were, the first to set out on the big adventure, crossing the country. And we strongly believe in this concept that we're all pioneers in some cases. It doesn't mean we have to move from east to west. It means we can make advancements in our field or advancements in our home life. But we live in this concept of we're all pioneers. And since we can't move west anymore, we've moved as far as Hawaii. Now our new frontier is our new west is the moon. Can we live in the moon or in other planets in the solar system? And it's just in the late 20th century, the space program in America was very, very important. Believe me, every time a new spaceship went into space, every single American sat in front of his or her television to watch it. And that was critical because we believed that's what would take us up, make us stronger, make us persevere even more. We couldn't find it now in the West, so now we went up into the sky. Yeah. Moving to the West, was endurance and strength, perseverance, fortune to be made. But if you made the opposite move from west to east, that was bad. It was truly believed that in the East, that's where there was corruption and weakness and indifference, which is very interesting because the East is where the revolution started in our country. It's believed that if you went out west and made your fortune but then took it back east, that it was often stolen by con men. The people in the East lack a sense of adventure. People in the East, we associate them with materialism, that they're more concerned about material things than they are spiritual or inner things. This is a major theme in both The Color Purple and in The Great Gatsby. This movement. In The Color Purple, it's a bit blurred because it's not a movement from east to west or west to east, but it's a movement from west to east in terms of Africa and then back again, east to west. But even though moving back to the old country, so to speak, that's still part of this concept. What happens and why does it happen? And what happens eventually at the end of the novel when the people who are in the East, in this case Africa, move back to the West, in this case in the South of the country. So, and in Jay Gatsby's case, before he was Jay Gatsby, he was somebody else. And to become Jay Gatsby, he had to move from east to west. And ultimately, that is a bad decision for the man known as Jay Gatsby. The next thing is the concept that, as we move across the country, this makes us rugged individuals. We're not those sissy boys, so to speak. And being rugged individuals like Paul Bunyan, you see there in the picture, we are masters of our own destinies. We decide what we're going to do. We decide how we're going to do it. And because we can face different things like grizzly bears and strange mountain terrains and Native Americans, this makes us stronger. And if you do fall down, hey, you pick yourself up and dust yourself off and start all over again. That's what we believe. You don't sit down and you cry about it. You simply pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. And in this concept, too, and this is very, very important, nobody gives you a handout for free. You have to earn everything you get. You have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that doesn't mean it should just be handed to you. You have to earn it. This is so important in our society. We don't believe in welfare. We don't believe that people should be on welfare or unemployment for a very long time. We will help them, but then we have to wean them off so that they can go and find their own way. And it's become a problem in America. Actually, this whole concept of healthcare, because the government may help some people with their healthcare costs, the people who were against it were saying, yeah, I have to pay for mine. This is the American dream. You go out, you make money, you pay for this stuff. It doesn't always work, of course, for the poor minority. So you have to be careful how you do that. But one must earn everything that one has. And of course, the opposite of this would be that you're too reliant on the government. Okay, you're on welfare, you're on unemployment. We believe in a strong central government, but a strong central government that has limited interference in our individual lives. And we still protest against this all the time. Some of the things that George Bush and President Barack Obama have done, people have protested against because they feel that the government is reaching out and touching them. And we don't believe that the government should do that. Not touch us as individuals. We don't mind paying our taxes because it helps the good of the country. But then don't interfere with my life or my work or something like that. To accept welfare, to accept unemployment benefits, that's a true sign of one's weakness. You can't pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again in a new job, a new place, whatever, then that you're being weak. You're being strong if you can not take these government handouts and find and earn things on your own. In the last part of this era that we're talking about, from the 1880s to 1910, this was a strong period of immigration in our country. And as I said at the top of this video, immigrants came to America with the thought that the streets were paved in gold, that the streets were made of gold. They truly believed this. I remember at this time mass communication was not very popular, was not around. They got stories of relatives who had gone to America and they earned a fortune, and really for many of these people it wasn't truly a fortune, but it was a fortune to the people left back home because they've never seen that kind of money. So more and more people came to our country, and that so that we had to develop quotas and we had to find ways to curtail immigration. Besides curtailing immigration, we also encouraged it at this time. You know, we let people know that there's lots of jobs to be had in America. And that if you come to America, you'll be fed. There'll be a chicken in every pot. If you come to America, you would find economic, political, and religious freedom in America. Hey, you were a communist? No problem. You could spout your communist views. Just don't try to push them on me. That's how Americans felt. You're Muslim, you're a Protestant, you're Baptist, no problem. We don't care. We don't have an official state religion. So follow whatever you want to follow. Just don't make sure that it doesn't hurt anybody. And economic, yeah, if you work hard, if you find the right job, you can make your dream come true. So lots and lots of immigrants during this period came to our country believing that they would truly find the best in the new world. But at the same time, we know that America has a very, very shaded past when it comes to immigrants. Oftentimes there's limited or no opportunities. You know, the Irish came to America and the Germans hated them because the Irish were taking the jobs that the Germans had. And then the blacks came to America and the Irish hated the blacks because the blacks were taking the jobs that the Irish had. Then the Hispanics came to America and the blacks hated the Hispanics because they were taking the jobs that the blacks had. You know, always after a period of time, as generations and generations stay in America, they don't want the street cleaning jobs. They don't want the garbage collecting jobs. They want more meaningful jobs. So you always are looking for people to take over these jobs, the busboy jobs, the garbage collector, things like that. Oftentimes, immigrants will take whatever they're given so that they can earn money. At the same time that the immigrants came, we didn't give them anything except a checkup at Ellis Island, but they had to go and earn it themselves, okay? But sometimes we weren't always nice about it. Sometimes we took choice away from them. For example, the school segregation things. You know, there were schools that would not allow black children in, restaurants that would not serve black children. Later, it became Latinos. Today, it's homosexuals in some cases. Not that they're immigrants, but the same concept. Usually a lot of this is due to the fact that we don't understand these new people. So as more and more Eastern Europeans were coming to our country, they had different beliefs and different traditions than Western Europeans. Well, first we didn't understand these people coming from Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania and Russia. Who are they? And then we sort of keep them at bay, you know, stay back. Also, many of these immigrants came to our country without anything except the clothes on their back. Well, yeah, it's very, very difficult to even start a new life if you don't have anything to start it with. And we didn't offer opportunities for people. Unlike, let's say, Australia, which after World War II offered lots of opportunities to people who were immigrants, whether they were Greek immigrants or Turkish immigrants or Asian immigrants, but even immigrants from Britain. They offered them housing and jobs. We didn't do that. People came to our country not because we invited them, like in Australia, but because they thought they would have a better life in our country. So we didn't feel it was our job to give them handouts, to give them capital. You wanted to come to our country, you make a go of it. At the same time, mobility became a huge issue because this is the time that we built more roads, we built railroads, we were moving from horse and buggy travel to the one-horse carriage, the automobile, and in building the automobile and trains and things like that, people could now easily move across the country. I mean, it would take months on horseback or by covered wagon for a family to move from the west to the east. Months and months and months. Now you can do that travel much quicker. So this concept of the open road begins to be developed. You see this often in American movies, in the road trip type movies, where people just hit the road and discover adventures as they go. The car becomes a very important status symbol in America. Not just any car, the Cadillac. The Cadillac was the ultimate of all cars. If you owned a Cadillac, man, you had arrived. We see the increase in trains and cars and planes. And with mobility comes the fact that people can change. And change is a good thing because change brings improvement. But in addition, often you were traveling these roads with helpers. The concept of the friendly waitress or the friendly sheriff or whatever the case may be. And this concept often finds itself into those road trip movies I talked about, but often into literature. For example, Huckleberry Finn is literally a road trip novel. He's not on a road, he's on a river. He's on a raft on the river. But it's the same concept. And it was one of the first earliest examples of a road trip type of book. But along the way, he meets all these people that help him. And because he's on a quest. He's on a quest to discover who he is. And we believe in this concept very strongly, that you can go on a quest. It doesn't have to be a long quest. It could be around the block. It could be to the next state. It could be across the country. But as you go on that quest, there are people that will help you on that quest if you're sincere about that quest. And this all comes from the concept of mobility. But if you don't move, no movement, well, then you're nothing but a couch potato type person. You stay put. That there's no movement, there's no journey, there's no change. And if there's no change, you cannot improve. You have to improve. This is why, like, so many families don't necessarily live in the same areas in America, like my family. Texas, Florida, California, New York, now me in Belgium. We're all over the place. This is good because this diversifies, improves our family. We all gain things by the fact that one of my brothers lives in Texas and another one still lives in our hometown where we grew up. And another one lives in California, and they benefit from what I gain here in Belgium. That's important. So if you stay on the couch and you never move, you never move very far, then there's no chance for improvement. And the American dream is built on the fact that you have to improve yourself. No one is going to do it for you. All right, that brings us to the last section, the 21st century, and how has the American dream changed in this era? Well, this is the era in 1931. Actually, John Trousseau Adams first coined the term "the American dream." He talks about that there already has been the American dream, but nobody's ever called it that, and now he calls it that. His book, The Epic of America, was a big hit in America, actually. But this is also the time that the concept of the American nightmare also comes into play. When you get writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, purposely writing The Great Gatsby to be anti-American dream. That was his purpose in writing the book. Other people did, like Maggie Girl of the Streets is another book that was really against what is this concept of the American dream. You know, here's Maggie, this poor girl. She has to be a prostitute. She has to live this dangerous life because there is no way for her to move. She's trying to move. She's trying to change, and she can't. And unfortunately, she dies. So these types of things, this is when the American dream really starts to fall into this opposition mode, was at this time. One of the big things to come out of this era is this concept, of course, of freedom or liberty, but also equality. We're very proud of the fact that we see ourselves as an equal nation. It's not always been easy, of course. You know, you have a picture there of Martin Luther King Jr. He knows firsthand that this struggle was not easy. But because of his work and the work of others, in the Hispanic community or the Native American community or the LGBT community, we have become a much more diverse society. Well, there's still racism in our country. Don't get me wrong. We have racism, but every country has some sort of racism. But we strongly believe in freedom and equality. And we will fight to the death to keep our freedom and equality, which is part of the reason we went to war after 9/11. We felt that our freedom was at stake, and we will fight to the death to keep our freedom. We don't always give freedom easily in our country to the people living in our country, but we will fight you that we deserve it. And of course, yeah, as I said, racism still exists in our country, but in the late 1980s, 1990s, we started an education program. Remember, let's go back to the very beginning. Education is important for an informed citizenship. So what we thought was we needed to add tolerance education into the curriculum for all students. And what we have found is that by adding this element, this unit that has to be studied by everybody, we have grown a more tolerant society. The reason that homosexuals have more rights today than ever before is because of the younger people in society, not necessarily because of the older people. But the younger people have had this tolerance. They've also younger people have gone to school with people from different colors, people from different countries, people from different backgrounds. That didn't exist, let's say, when my parents went to school, but I went to school with Hispanics and blacks and Chinese and other types of Asians. So I have a much more tolerant nature than my parents do in some cases, and my nieces and nephews even more. They go to school now with children who identify as lesbian or gay or transgender. They go to school with children with special needs and wheelchairs and children who are autistic, along with black, Hispanic, and other groups. So they're becoming more tolerant, and this is very, very important. But of course, we can't lose sight of the fact that our government has sanctioned racism. They did very little in the beginning to stop the KKK. That's basically sanctioning racism. We didn't have a civil rights law until the 1960s. All blacks were still not allowed to vote in some states, I should say, because we didn't have the Civil Rights Act. Blacks were not allowed to go to school. Then it was Latinos that were not allowed to go to school. So we we've done this, but again, I said this before. We have tried to atone for our sins, not always successfully. The black population probably is the population that is most angry over the history of that has happened in our country. The Latino population has seemed to allow it to stay in the past, but in some cases not the blacks, and that's why you see a lot of cries of racism when you have a white cop shooting a black individual. Uh, is it racism? I don't know, but it's still, that's what still people think, and that's critical. But you have to admit that there's racism here in Belgium as well. This is an interesting concept. And it's one that's gotten a lot of traction in the news lately in America. The Bible talks about the fact that the city on the hill is the city closest to God. Therefore, it's the most godly city. It's moral. It's charitable. It's righteous. It doesn't have a society built on class. Um, I mean, if you go through history, we strongly believe that we are a moral people. We've had our problems, but we've been able to atone for their sins. We truly believe that we are moral. We don't have an official state religion like you do here in Belgium, but more than 80% of Americans identify with a religion, and that gives them a moral center. We are a very charitable society, I must admit. I mean, so much so that you can even on your taxes write off the amounts of money that you have given to various charities. We go to benefit dinners, we hold telethons, whatever the case may be, to donate to our favorite charity. We are righteous. We fought for our freedom. We defeated the British. And therefore, we think that we have the right to say, look, this is important. And because we do it, we think that others should do it as well. That doesn't necessarily give us the right to impose it on others, but we believe that others have the right to it. We don't see ourselves as a society built on class, even though there's no question that we're a society built on class. You have the rich, you have the upper middle class, the lower middle class, the poor, those that are at poverty level. Uh, but we don't think that there's a difference. The people who are in the rich, well, yeah, some of them got there because their daddies and their mommies had money. But some of the people got there because they actually earned it, like a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates. These weren't people who were rich to begin with, but they picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and they started it and did well. We strongly believe that you can move within our class system, where in the British class system, you were not allowed to move. Once you were in the lower class, you were always in the lower class. Once you were in the wealthy, you stayed in the wealthy, even if you lost your money. You just hid in your manor. But we believe that you can move across these class breaks. That's not the case in other societies. All of this is called American exceptionalism. And there's a movement, specifically in some of the more conservative states, that we need to have an American history curriculum that is built on what makes America exceptional. What they want to try to do is sweep under the rug the Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, how we treated slaves before the Civil War. They truly believe that we should look at only those things that make us great. That's what separates us from the rest of the world. That's what makes us the city on the hill. That's why people want to come and live in America. It's an interesting concept. It's being debated across America as we speak. Like I said, mostly from the conservative states because they believe that America is great no matter what. They never want to see America's faults, even if they've been the ones to create the faults in America. Um, every country, and Barack Obama has said this, every country is exceptional in one way or another. Yes, there is American exceptionalism, but that doesn't make us better than another country. That makes us different from another country. Does that put us to city on the hill? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not a very religious people, so I don't believe in a city on the hill. But a lot of people do. We believe in so much so that we put in God we trust on our money. We used to have school prayer when I was growing up in public schools, nonetheless. So yeah, we believe in this concept of sitting on the hill. But if we're not sitting on the hill, well, then we're sitting on fire, and this is we don't want to get to this end. We've been on this end during the Civil War. We were a country on fire. There's no question about it. We were fighting one against the other, just like other European countries have done in civil wars. Um, you know, people believe that if we're not sitting on the hill, then we're not that different from Europe. And we do like to separate ourselves from Europe, I must admit, just like Britain does. Um, Europe has one way of thinking, we have one way of thinking. That doesn't make Europe's way of thinking wrong or our way wrong, they're just different. We don't want to be perceived as thinking the same as Europe. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Any more than does Europe or Belgium or Germany want to be perceived as thinking like Americans. No, you want to keep your own individuality, your own identity, your own nationalism. Hell, the 1800s were filled with wars over nationalism, the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy. Even in the late 1880s, 1800s, the unification or the reunification of America. It's all built on this concept of nationalism. So nationalism leads to exceptionalism, and therefore we have to keep something that's ours. But we also have to recognize that we live in a global society, therefore we have to work with our European partners, we have to work with our Middle East partners, we have to work with our Asian partners, and that we as Americans are not perfect. We have a history that shows that we're not perfect. Okay, we can accept that. We can point it out. That's not a problem. But we think that other countries should realize that they have a tainted history as well sometimes. Sometimes we're targeted because we are such a superpower and we're such a global power. You know, people like to target us because, you know, oh, geez, they're racist over there. Or they shoot black kids in Ferguson. But, you know, you lose sight of some of the things that happen in other countries as well. So we do realize, we need to realize in America, as Americans, that we're far from perfect. And I think many of us do. And so we're not so much a city on fire, we're not so much a city on the hill, but we're somewhere hopefully in between. Hopefully we find that balance somewhere. In today's society, you know, well, we still, you know, we live with this concept of abundance. You know, it's not necessary, you know, it's not that you have to have lots of things, okay? You know, you go into some of these rooms of children's and it's just filled with toys and toys and toys and toys. We give. You know, a lot of parents now, okay, they let their children play football, play soccer, play baseball, play basketball, go dancing, riding, blah, blah. You know, it's like they have no free time whatsoever. It's always taken up on the newest things. And they can never have too much. Okay? We forget, though, that we can't take this stuff with us, and that's important. Novelty. We love the fact that we can be different, and we can be novel, and we can be unique. A lot of unique ideas have come out of America, but we have to recognize that a lot of unique ideas have come out of other countries as well. This concept of democracy of goods, this is the concept that, we have to we have to be willing to take goods from other countries, from our country, from other countries, that, together, this makes a fuller democracy. We can't create everything we need in our country. Therefore, we're reliant on other countries, but they're reliant on us as well. And so we have to share this. And it has to be a two-way street. Democracy means that it's not one person talking, but it's multiple people talking. And then, of course, freedom of choice. This is so important in today's society. Freedom of the schools that you go to, freedoms of the universities that you choose to go to, freedom of who you get to marry, freedom of where you get to live, what kind of house you want. We don't like lots of limitations. We want choice to be freely available to everybody. And that's very, very important in today's society. So, there you have a fairly long overview of the American Dream. This video will be available to you throughout the semester, so when it comes time for the exam, it'll be up so you can review it at any point. But keep in mind that when you come to class after having viewed this video, you're going to need to pinpoint specific elements from these 9 different American Dream scenarios and identify them in literature. Okay, so that's very, very important. If you have any questions, please bring them to class with you, and that'll be the first thing we do, is answer any questions related to today's video. So I hope you have a broader sense of what the American Dream is. I'll leave you on this note. The American Dream is still alive in America. A lot of people have said they think it's dead. It's not. Every day, somebody is living the American Dream. Me, my nieces, my nephews, my parents, my friends in America, we're all living the American Dream. Sometimes even foreigners can live the American Dream. That happens as well. Okay, so I will see you in class, and I hope you enjoyed this retrospective of the American Dream. Thank you.